All right, so this is what I'm calling my round two for our not only just sources of financial assistance, but also, beginning to talk a little bit more about not just the immediate cash flow assistance that's available, but also, get folks thinking about cash flow, and how do we start, approaching, our cash flow projections and things like that. So. I was reminded of this scripture passage as we were moving over the last week and a half or so, as we've been moving out into dealing with the banks and trying to navigate, this whole government assistance. This is just the one that really kind of came back to me. And so, being like sheep in the midst of wolves just seemed very apropos. And then again, parts of the strategy part of this, being wise as serpents about how we try to coordinate some of these myriad forms of assistance that are available to us so that we get the maximum benefit out of them. So that was really, it just resonated with me. And so I just wanted to lead off with that. And so, now that we've been through this first iteration and going through the PPP loan process or evaluating if that even applied to us, we a lot of us, if not all of us, have been through at least some form of that process. And so now, what is next? Where do we go from here? I wanted to draw your attention to, there is updated SBA guidance for faith-based organizations. This is one of the things that's posted on the finance info section of our COVID-19 resource pages on the web.
Hey, Phyllis, I want to interrupt you for a second, because I know in the chat, and I know this is a broad concern, that people are hearing that it's now run out of money. And so I don't want them to check out of this conversation.
Sure.
Because, the likelihood is Congress is going to need to come back and refund, put more money into the fund. Mm-hmm. So I think it's important to say to everybody, yeah, we've heard the same thing. That it also depends on whether you were in already and on queue. You know more about this than I do, but I just, since I'm seeing that on the chat, I don't want to lose people's attention. And so I thought maybe you want to hit that quickly so they don't check out.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. Because as you well know, it's really difficult to do all of this and monitor the chat space at the same time. So I appreciate you lifting that up. And yes, what you said is exactly correct. What we've been given to understand from the very beginning is that, each bank, which is an SBA lender, and I don't know how they do their formulas or how they accomplish this, but out of that $349 billion pot of money that Congress allocated to the SBA for this particular program, that each bank had an allocation based on, maybe it's their lending history with the SBA, I don't know. But each one of the banks then is given this to administer within their own authority. So banks have continued to take applications up into the point where they reach their limit of what they know they can fund. That's the understanding that I've been given so far. I do know that some banks are still accepting applications even on this initial round of funding. I had heard that Wells Fargo, which was one of the first banks to stop accepting applications, actually had its allocation. There were some restrictions that they had because of bad behavior with the SBA before that apparently got lifted to the point where they then had access to more funding and reopened their applications even after they had initially closed them. So, it definitely does, behoove you, rather than just saying at this point in time, oh, it's not worth it, they ran out of money. You need to contact your bank. You don't know for sure whether you can apply or whether you can't apply until you contact your bank. The one thing I will say is that your chances of being able to get an application in, if you are not already a customer of that bank, are probably somewhere between slim and none. The banks are really prioritizing applications from banking customers or existing loan customers over people who don't have any other kind of a relationship with their banks. So I think that that's something that you probably should be aware of as well. And so I am going to go back up here for a moment. Let's see. Took care of that one. One of my wardens works for Bloomberg as a financial reporter, told me that the PPP has run out of money. And so, there's a lot of room. One of the things that's like so consistent about this situation is there's rumors floating around out there everywhere. And until you actually just go to your bank and give it a try, you really don't know whether, because the PPP in general is across all of the lending banks. So to say that they haven't, that they've totally run out of money is not necessarily even accurate. And as Bishop Stokes said, I am aware that that there is this next round of stimulus right from the very beginning. One of the things that's been most often is that they need more funding for this program. So do go ahead and keep an eye out on that. So let me see, application. Yeah. Let's see. Yeah, so I was reading Jack's comment about, Jack Zamboni's comment about Lendio, and I did have some contact with them about Lendio, and you're absolutely right. Lendio is a loan broker. So basically what folks like Lendio did, there's another one called Cabbage, I believe, Kabbage, who does the same thing, is basically tries to farm your loan out, like search through all the different lending banks to see if they can get your loan placed somewhere. So they are not themselves lenders, but they try to, shop your application around to see if they can find somebody who will accept your application. And in response to Ed's question, I think that looking around for other SBA approved lenders couldn't hurt. But again, I think that the chances that you would be able to place your loan with a bank that you don't already do business with is probably not going to have productive results. Looking at Marshall's comment about having underwriters contact us for more information, that is actually a very good sign, because to Bishop Stokes's point about being in the queue, once you actually get your application submitted and they've acknowledged your application, they do put you in the queue, for in their queue for the funding that they have available. That means you are in their system and you are in the process. That is a good thing, because if they weren't asking you for information and following up with you on your application, I would be concerned. Obviously they need a little time to do that after you submit your application, but once you submit your application and you get that acknowledgement back, that means at least you're in consideration. And that's a very good thing. And so, yes, processing really is happening behind the curtain. But when you receive those communications, you know that you are in the process. My experience with Investors Bank is that they have been maintaining literally queues of people under a first come, first served basis. So the sooner that you got your application in, the more likely that you'll be able to realize something from it. But also not necessarily to treat that as a guarantee that you are going to get that maximum amount that you asked for. That's also, within the jurisdiction of the banks, to be able to decide on the final loan amount that you're going to get. And they may be doing that within whatever systems they have based on the number of applications they're considering. So again, better something than nothing. And hopefully, they will do first come, first serve for those of us who got in early, but we don't know that for a guarantee. Martin Oguike was asking, are these loans going to be written off or forgiven in the future? I will go through that, briefly. There will be There is more detail about that on the website, in some of the recordings as far as the actual process for the calculation of forgiveness. But, you know, as long as you, the basic answer to your question is that as long as you are using the proceeds from these loans to maintain your current levels of employment, both in terms of total amounts of wages paid to employees and the number of employees that you're, you know, so if your number of employees is staying the same, if your wage level, you know, the amount of wages that you're paying is staying the same, and you're paying your health insurance premiums and you're paying your pension assessments, and including, you know, utilities in your forgiveness calculation, and maximizing, paying attention to making sure that the total that you're paying on all of that stuff over the next 8 weeks equals or exceeds the amount of the loan that you got from the bank, then you will either totally or for a majority of it, get that loan completely forgiven. And so I will be also repeating what I'm about to go through with you for the lay leaders town hall tonight at 7 o'clock. If you want, you know, for, you know, either yourselves or any of your folks who need more detail on that actual calculation, you know, please feel free to join that. I'm not sure how much of that I'm going to have a chance to go through here, but it will be repeated again. And let's see, additionally, okay, there is a lot of confusion, certainly, about that. And yeah, you're right, Lendio and Cabbage aren't banks. Yes, that's true. Yeah, yeah, the crush of apps in the first day crash many banks, but apply anyway and get in line. So I'm seeing a lot of affirmations. So I'm also seeing Lee's comment about being good stewards and not grab SBA money if the church has resources to get through this. Many small businesses don't have the kind of investments and savings that some churches have. And for some churches, that may very well be true. I don't want to, I want everybody to, you know, again, if we are approaching this from that standpoint of being good stewards and from a discipleship standpoint, that's really where we need to be. That is a foundational place that we need to be. And so there's the part of that that would lead to what Lee just put out there. There's also the part of that that says that a lot of our congregations right now, even if so far what I've been hearing back by and large is that at least through the end of March, a lot of our congregations have not yet begun to experience cash flow crunches. And I'm grateful for that. I give great thanks that, you know, these electronic giving measures and people's heightened awareness and their, you know, maybe even stronger desire to be in connection have led to them connecting by Zoom and all of these other means and supporting, you know, financially with their pledges and continuing their financial support to the best extent they can. You know, our cash flow situation right now, I've only had a few for whom that's been really a critical measure. However, you know, what I would also say is that in many cases, the demand for the outreach ministries, the food pantries, the feeding programs, the housing services, all of those things that our congregations are providing has also increased exponentially. So if you can access a PPP loan grant that will help you maintain your payroll through this period and allow you to, you know, use your resources to better support your programs out in the community, that was a part of the original intent that Congress expressed in helping congregations. And that's why, again, you see in the background the updated SBA guidance for faith-based organizations. That's part of the reason for that document. You know, they wanted to make it very specifically clear, and there was a letter that came out from the joint houses of Congress that made it clear to the SBA, the Department of the Treasury, and the Department of Labor that all of these benefits of the CARES program were explicitly and intentionally to be made available to faith-based organizations because they realize the critical role that we play in support of our communities, which is even more needed at this time. So as part of our stewardship and our discipleship of being able to take advantage of all of the resources that we now have available to us, including government resources, to be able to support our communities, that also needs to be a part of our consideration. Emily had asked the question, that's the 8 weeks after you get the loan, not the current 8 weeks, right? And that the answer to your question, Emily, is yes. Your 8-week period for consideration starts after you get your first distribution from the loan. That is guidance that just came out over the last week, which was brand new, and it was good to get that clarified. So, I think, I'm going to just let everybody, read through Father Ndishabandi's comment, and take that to heart as well. Bill Riker's question for Matawan and South Amboy. So again, we have an affiliation situation here. The benefit costs at present are well below what they'll become next month. Is there any loan possibility for them? Yes, absolutely. You can still apply for the loan based on actually your 2019 levels of payroll and employment. Let's see. Okay, I think that's it for now. So let me go through. I have to go through this really quickly because I'm aware, and Bishop, if you need to just break in if I don't get through this quickly enough and give Keith his time when he has to be on, then we can also circuit.
That's why I figured come back to it if we need to. I just want to let you know. And Steve, if you could look for Keith, that would be great.
He has not joined yet, Bishop.
He said he'd jump on about 11:45.
Alrighty, so then, kind of going back to, I did my spiel on these updated SBA guidance for faith-based organizations. This is posted on the website, I think I've probably said enough about that. The relevant updates, I'm going to start with the Paycheck Protection Program. We've gone through some of the new information that I have. One of the other clarifications that has come out over the past week is there had been questions about, especially in situations like ours, because we're a diocese, are we considered to be affiliated? This the way that this quote is worded here is a long way of saying no. So we're not, for the purposes of this particular act, we are not considered, each one of our congregations is considered to be an independent entity for the purposes of this loan and grant assistance because of the way that because our affiliation is based on religious teaching or belief. We qualify for an exemption from affiliation rules, which basically means we are not considered to be affiliated. So what we've been doing is what we should have been doing all along, which is apply separately as congregations. We did receive clarification over the last week, at least from what is coming out in the, some of the more updated guidance. That inclusion of stipendiary employees whose earnings are reported on 1099s rather than through payroll should be excluded from the business's payroll costs. This was different from what we were hearing before. And I am also aware that many of the banks to which many of us have already applied were in fact accepting 1099s as documentation and indicating that inclusion of those amounts was fine. So, based on that and the fact that it's still a very gray area and I'm not sure that practice is following, what some of those things were saying is, so if you've already included or intend to include stipendiary employees in your application, you don't need to revise your application or say anything about it. If your bank already has it, let your bank come back to you and tell you what you're going to do. And if you're applying and you see that your bank is willing to accept the 1099 as documentation, I would still try to include it, and let them come back to you and tell you differently. Again, that's still, there's been, some clarification of language, but not necessarily of practice. the question we just asked about when does the 8-week forgiveness period begin, and that's been made very clear that the 8-week period begins on the date that your lender makes the first disbursement of the loan to you. The lender's supposed to make the first disbursement of the loan no later than 10 calendar days from the date that they actually approve you. That's not an acknowledgement, that's an approval. So from the date that they approve you, they have 10 days to make the distribution. We had questions before coming through about there is a $100,000 per employee compensation limit. So anything that is over $100,000 per employee of compensation gets excluded. And so any employee can only max out at that $100,000. And this is on an annual basis, obviously. There was a question about, is that just the cash compensation or does that include the benefits? And it was made very clear that that $100,000 limitation only applies to the cash compensation. So if you have $100,000, if you've maxed out on your stipend, your SICA, your cash housing allowance, if you max out at $100,000 on all that stuff, you can still add to that the amount of your health insurance premiums, dental insurance premiums, and pension assessments. So, you know, as an employee, you can go over in total $100,000. You just can't go over $100,000 in that cash compensation. So that was clarified. And I think that pretty much takes us through that. The time period to be used in determining both number of employees and total and average monthly payroll costs used to calculate the maximum loan amounts. Initial guidance that came out said you're supposed to use a 12 months preceding the month, preceding the date of your application. Subsequently, guidance came out that said you're supposed to use the 2019 calendar year. Most recent guidance says you can use either. And it's basically up to your bank. Your bank will tell you, or should tell you in the application process, what time period they're requiring, because they're requiring documentation to back up your calculations. And I think the idea behind 2019 is that makes it a lot easier to back up because you've got all your annual payroll tax returns rather than taking some kind of an odd 12-month period. But again, look to your bank for guidance on that. If they don't specify in their application, I would use the 2019 calendar year because it's just that much easier to document rather than having to try to get different quarters in different years. How do you determine the number of employees? Again, there are some different options that you have. You just need to be consistent in how you do it. You can choose to calculate the average number of employees during the 12 months immediately preceding the month end prior to your application date. Again, if you're you should be consistent between what you're using to calculate your average monthly payroll costs and the maximum amount of your loan. You should use consistent time period to choose the average number or calculate the average number of your employees. So if you use the 2019 calendar year to calculate the amount of your loan and document that, then use the 2019 calendar year to determine your average number of employees. If you use that, the 12-month prior calculation, use that for both things. And then there's also an option with the number of employees to literally go through pay period by pay period and take your average number, each pay period, take your number each pay period and average it out that way. It is important to note that for the purposes of this number, full-time and part-time employees each count as one employee. This is different than the forgiveness calculation where there's a full-time equivalent employee calculation that you have to do. This is just to put this number, when they ask you on your application for your number of employees, these are the options that you have. I'm going to just take a break for a minute. Bishop, is Keith on yet?
Keith, are you there?
No, he doesn't show up in the list yet.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Well, just feel free to break in and stop me when he does. One of the other questions is, what if we're a seasonal chapel? How do we calculate our average monthly payroll? as well as our number of employees. And for seasonal chapels, you have a choice of starting, either February 15th of 2019. So again, last year, you can use a start date of either February 15th or March 1st, and an end date of June 30th, and figure out what your average monthly payroll for that period was. A question about, is cash housing allowance for clergy includable in payroll costs? Again, our answer is yes. I've seen very strong indications, yes, across the board. But I have had, instances where a couple people have come back to me and said, well, our bank is not letting us include that. My encouragement is to the best extent possible, work with the bank to try to educate them on that. But as we've seen, these initial application processes are pretty much strictly online. There's not really any opportunity for back and forth with an actual person as you're applying online. So if your bank's application in some way, shape, or form does not allow you to enter housing allowance, cash housing allowances, then follow through with the application without it, with whatever information that you can include, so that you can get your application submitted and into the queue. And then in the process, when you actually are dealing, even if it's by email, back and forth with your bank, see if you can work with them that way. One other thing I guess I meant to mention when we were back at the SBA guidance for faith-based organizations, I don't know if anybody else out there besides Christchurch and Bordentown is using Bank of America and may have already gone through the loan application process with them. But I was informed that they were having a real problem with Bank of America even accepting their application, because they were requiring proof of 501c3 status through an individual determination letter. So in other words, they weren't letting Christchurch apply because Christchurch does not have their own determination letter from the IRS. All of our congregations operate under the group exemption given to the Diocese of New Jersey. And I have not had reports of anybody else having a problem with that with their bank. So I don't know if it was just a branch problem, with those particular folks that Christchurch happened to be in contact with. But if anybody else, especially if you have used Bank of America and have been able to successfully submit an application, perhaps to get in touch with Father Matt and help him or help them through that particular part of the process. What I did is I had sent Father Matt those specific faith-based guidance there, which says, there's specific language in there that says churches do not have to provide, or faith-based organizations do not have to provide an individual determination letter. It's very specific. So, I'm hoping that the documentation that we were able to provide with the answers to those questions and with that letter from Congress that we have a copy of was sufficient to help them get through the application. If anybody else has had an experience of having to deal with that and can share that offline, not necessarily right now, that would be helpful. Going back to the question about how much of the loan can be eligible for forgiveness, here are the criteria that you need to follow in order to maximize the amount of your loan that can be eligible for forgiveness. Out of the loan proceeds that you get, you have to be able to document that you use 75% or more of those proceeds for payroll costs, which does include pension assessments and health insurance premiums, as well as, and dental insurance premiums as well. The remaining 25% can also, the qualifying uses for that would include rent, if you pay rent to anybody. Most of us don't. More interest on any mortgages or loans that we may be paying. So not the whole payment, but the interest portion of it is an allowable use to qualify for forgiveness. and utilities, electricity, gas, water, transportation, telephone, and internet. And so again, we're talking about during this 8-week period, it's important to document this. During the 8-week period following the first distribution of your loan proceeds. Pay your employees, pay your health insurance premiums, pay your pension assessments, and even, maximize the amount. You be keeping track of this against the balance of, the amount of the loan that you were awarded, so that you can make sure that by the end of that 8-week period, that you've complied with the 75% or more towards payroll costs guideline, and that overall you've gotten as close as you can, or maybe even exceeded the amount of the loan that you got. And if you can do those things, your loan should be eligible for 100% forgiveness. To the extent that you don't, then there could be a reduction in the amount of forgiveness that you have. You also have to, again, pay attention to your workforce, your number of employees. And here again is where literally just yesterday evening, I got documentation about how they are handling what they call this full-time equivalent employee calculation. Again, comparing from the beginning of your, I believe they're actually using February 15th as the date for the initial calculation of your full-time equivalent employees. And then what were your full-time equivalent employees at the end of the forgiveness period? Those are the things you're going to be comparing. There is a sort of a grace period. So if the end of your, if you already perhaps have had to, and I apologize for the phone in the background, I'm just going to be talking through it. If you had to already, perhaps lay off or furlough employees, there is a grace period where if by June 30th, you go back and make those employees whole, so that you are now in compliance with having kept your payroll costs and your number of employees consistent through the 8-week period. So if you go back, once you get the loan, you can even do this, once you get the loan and now that you have to work towards this, if you had already had to lay off employees, you can go ahead and back pay them and bring them back on board for payroll purposes, just to maintain that consistent level. That's what this program has really been all about from the very beginning, is trying to maintain those levels. So this is how they're allowing people who may have already had to lay people off to be able to still qualify. And there again, you've got to work with your employees, because some of them may have already had to apply for unemployment. And so, there's, you need to be in constant communication with them there in order to be able to try to figure that out, because we can't do both. And then, the question, what if some of my loan is not forgiven? Okay, so if I don't make it up to the total 100% forgiveness on my loan, what happens to the balance? The payments on that can be completely deferred for 6 months. And we've heard that may go up to a year. And the maximum term of that loan is 2 years. So you could pay it back over a 2-year period at an interest rate of 1% per year. The interest does begin to accrue on the loan as soon as it's disbursed. However, the accrued interest for the forgiveness period is forgiven also in proportion to the amount of the loan itself that gets forgiven. And on that balance that might still be due at the end, if there is any, if you just want to pay it off right away, there are no prepayment penalties. So just to circle back, how do you maximize loan forgiveness? Continue paying your employees at pre-February 15th, 2020 levels. And prior to June 30th, rehire and or back pay employees who may have already been furloughed or laid off. Continue to pay your health and dental insurance premiums and pension assessments during the 8-week forgiveness period, and even pay enough of them, even if you may be prepaying a little bit of a portion of some of them, to make sure, because again, these are the kinds of payroll costs that get you above that 75% level and, get you all the way up to the maximum, to the amount of your loan. If you need to prepay a little bit of your health and dental insurance premiums and pension assessments to maximize the amount of your forgiveness, it really makes sense to do it. Why leave money on the table? And then, if you happen to be in a position where you need help with cash flow, perhaps even between the time that you're applying and the time that you get your loan actually dispersed to you, to make sure that you're able to continue your employment levels during the 8-week period, please contact me. Because again, if you've applied for a loan, you're eventually going to get the money. It's a matter of cash flow. We could make sure that we can help you maintain your employment levels, and then you could just pay us back out of the proceeds of your loan once you actually get it. So again, we're happy to do that. Before I go on any further, should I stop and answer questions, Steve?
I think so. Let's look. I've actually been I've been back channeling, trying to reach Keith, so I haven't been keeping up on the chat messages. But just kind of look. I think we talked about Bill's message. Did you address Megan Thomas's quote about Bank of America?
No, I did not.
Oh, I guess she's just mostly being joking that Father Matt will need to put his foot down and be very assertive. No other bank in this region imposes so many barriers to getting business done of any sort. I would recommend that he tell his BOA rep that he will be in touch with the New Jersey Division of Banking and Insurance.
There you go. I like that.
And Ben Madison adds, we know how tough it is for Matt to be assertive.
So great to see everybody's having still maintaining their sense of humor through this whole thing. It's great.
Oh, but okay. Jack Zamboni asks, can we prepay pension/health to maximize forgiveness amount?
Absolutely. Yep. Clearly, Jack heard what I just said. So, if you get to the point, where you're coming up to the end of the 8-week period and you're worried about not being able to either get to 75% on payroll costs, which those, health, pension and health insurance do qualify under the payroll cost category, or you're ultimately worried about not being able to, come up to the total amount that you were loaned. Absolutely. That's exactly what I would do. It could be that, by virtue of prepaying one health insurance premium bill or one pension assessment payment, you could make the difference between not getting to the amount of your loan to 100% forgiveness and getting to 100% forgiveness. I would absolutely pay that bill. Because you're going to be paying it from, money that you have already received towards that purpose anyway. And then we'll talk about, other strategies that we can use beyond that. So, so then I guess I will go ahead and just move on. If you didn't apply for a PPP loan or grant, or if you're not able to apply, or if it maybe even doesn't make sense for you to apply, what else, what happens next? So, again, this is an update. We have talked before about the employee retention credit. It might be something that you would want to investigate because it's something that is an either or with the PPP loan grant. So if you were to do this, you couldn't do the PPP, and if you've already done the PPP, you can't do this. So the retention credit is a refundable credit against payroll taxes. It's 50% of the first $10,000 of compensation. It's calculated as 50% of the first $10,000 on an annual basis of compensation paid to each eligible employee. It is available if you couldn't participate in PPP. And so the way that this works is that when you calculate this credit, which basically amounts to $5,000 per employee who makes over $10,000, and then 50% of the compensation for anybody under $10,000, you calculate whatever that amount is. And then on your quarterly 941 forms, where you have to pay into the IR, well, you may even be making federal bank deposits, I don't know. But whether it's deposits you're making with your bank or payments that you're making with your 941 forms, this credit is applicable against those payments. So you could basically stop making those payments and use this credit up to the extent that you have payroll taxes that are due. If the credit actually is calculated to be higher on an annual basis, so this is between now and the end of the year is when you're using this credit. If the credit ends up being higher than the amount of payroll taxes that you owe, then you can apply for a refund of the amount that's over and above what you owed. And for those of us who don't normally file tax returns or don't file tax returns with the IRS or information returns, supposedly the IRS is developing a special form that will allow us to request the refundable portion of the credit because we don't have any other taxes to offset it against. So that's the employee retention credit.
You do have a couple of questions. There are a couple of questions on that.
Okie doke. So let me go in here.
Yeah. So Valerie asks, how does that work for priests that are considered self-employed?
Actually, what I'm going to get into there is probably this section I'm going into with the deferred payroll tax payments. Well, it's kind of a combination of both. And again, the supply clergy covered on this program, probably the same, the supply clergy question, I guess, let me just deal with that quickly first. If from the standpoint of churches who are paying supply clergy, the supply clergy wouldn't be normally paid through payroll. Okay, so you're not going to be able to take advantage of the employee retention credit for a supply priest. As I mentioned before, because I'm not sure what this program is referring to, but going back to the Paycheck Protection Program, we have had banks who are accepting PPP applications that do include supply clergy costs, that are paid out normally on 1099s, not on payroll payroll tax returns, but supply clergy. If you're in what I would think of would be a very unusual situation where you're paying a supply clergy person on payroll, there again, you're probably not having payroll taxes deducted or, having to pay into the IRS for payroll taxes. So the employee retention credit would not help you in that particular case. And so going back to Valerie's question about how that works for priests that are considered self-employed, they're again coming out with guidance that would have to do with the amount, with how that would apply to the SICA that you claim on your individual tax return. So this wouldn't be an employee retention credit that your congregation, you would take advantage of because because they're not, they're not paying that tax in for you. However, there's a provision of that that could potentially apply to your own individual tax return, and that they're still coming out with guidance about. So that again will be part of the ongoing updates that we're doing as this situation evolves and we get better guidance, on that particular part. But again, also, if your congregation has already applied under the PPP, you can't do it anyway because it's mutually exclusive. So I will again keep you posted on that. The other part that does also apply to Valerie's question is these deferred payroll tax payments. And so again, this is an either or with the PPP. So if you already applied and you get your PPP loan, this would not apply to you. But if for some reason you don't, you should revisit this. This particular provision allows for deferral of payment of just the employer portion of Social Security, 6.2%. And this is, the way that they're talking about this particular part here is pretty much exclusively applicable to your lay employees, because again, your priests they don't participate under the FICA program for Social Security and Medicare. They participate in the SICA program, which treats them as self-employed for these purposes. So as far as congregations are concerned, they would only be able to defer the 6.2%, which represents the employer portion of Social Security for their lay employees. And it is a deferral. This is not forgiveness. This is not a grant. It's just deferral to, again, help with payroll tax or with cash flow considerations. For whatever amount that would come to, you could defer payment of that. And they're, again, adjusting their 941 forms to allow for this. You can defer 50% of that amount through December 31st of 2021, and the remaining 50% of that amount by December 31st of 2022. So, again, for the I think probably the overwhelming majority of our congregations, 6.2% of what you pay as employer portion of payroll tax for your lay employees, and the fact that it's a deferral and not a forgiveness, would not be anywhere near the benefit that the PPP loan forgiveness would be. And that's part of the reason we haven't really focused that much on deferred payroll tax. However, if you either, if you didn't qualify for PPP, or for some reason you don't get the loan, you might want to go ahead and revisit this just to see as a next step if it can be helpful in deferring your payroll tax payments. And again, circling back to Valerie's question, the interesting part about this, regardless of whether you did the PPP or not, is that this can be applicable, as far as we understand it right now, to allow clergy on their own individual income tax returns to defer the portion of their self-employment tax that equates to this 6.2%. So again, clergy are paying this, as I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir here, you guys are all really well aware that, you're paying your self-employment tax on your own individual income tax returns. So you could be eligible to defer a portion under these same terms, 50% through 2021 and 50% through 2022. More guidance on that is coming, so I will be staying in touch with all of you about that. But
and again, that's a deferral. It's not a waiver.
Exactly. So it would
be it's a cash flow issue.
Exactly. Yep. So yeah, we'll stay up to date on that. Last but not least, unemployment provisions. Again, we're getting continuing guidance. So this is now everything that we've been talking about up until this time has been completely aimed towards being able to maintain our workforces in place, which, as church is something that we really want to be, perhaps even more cognizant of, than secular employers do, because it's part of how we minister, to our own employees, many of whom, do count on, the amounts that they're making significantly to help them. So, everything we've been talking about so far has been aimed at maintaining employment. If you get to the point where, for whatever reason, you feel like you've exhausted all other avenues and you still just can't manage to, maintain employment, you do need to be aware that unemployment benefits are available to our workers if you do have to lay people off. Even though you haven't paid into the state unemployment system in the past, this is a federally backed program, or the parts that now apply to our workers are a part of the federally backed program under the federal pandemic unemployment compensation that supplements state unemployment. And so even if you qualify for $0 under state unemployment, there is a $600 weekly benefit under federal pandemic unemployment compensation that is in addition to whatever your state unemployment amount would be. And so this unemployment program is still administered through the states. So if your employees have to apply, they still do apply through the New Jersey Department of Labor. And on their website, you'll see they also have now, really a very structured system by which you apply. There's only a range of time in which you can do that, because they're trying to make sure their systems don't crash from the number of people trying to claim benefits. But you do go through your state unemployment, through the New Jersey Department of Labor, to be able to access this program. They've also extended the maximum 26 eligibility period to 39 weeks. And in many cases, they're backfilling that immediate. New Jersey has a 1 week waiting period, and the federal program, they're looking at the federal program to be able to sort of backfill that first week waiting period. The only qualifications have to do with the fact that the unemployment has to be related to the COVID-19 crisis. So whether it's somebody literally becoming sick and unable to work, or having to care for somebody who's sick and unable to work, or just having been laid off because of the inability to work because businesses and churches haven't been able to sustain employment, any of those things would qualify as a condition related to the COVID-19 crisis. That's basically how the unemployment provisions of this work. I just want to check here and see. Okay, yeah, so I'm getting questions about the EIDL. I'm getting there. There's a method to my madness, so I will move right along. So under the heading of whether or not I applied for a PPP loan or grant, what else should I be considering? So all of those things we just talked about have to be coordinated with the PPP program, because they're either mutually exclusive. Well, they're mutually exclusive. But in the case of the economic injury disaster loans, the EIDLs that we just saw coming up in the chat box, they can also, they can be coordinated with a PPP loan, so they're not mutually exclusive. You just have to be really careful about how they coordinate and be aware of potential pitfalls, the wise as serpents thing. So EIDLs are low interest loans up to $2 million, supposedly. And I'll get into the supposedly part of it in a minute. The allowable uses include all types of operating expenses. So your, property and liability insurance, your repairs and maintenance, office supplies, although we don't really have all that much of that right now. All of those, it really expands way out beyond just payroll costs. They also have been really touting these emergency economic injury grants, which they initially had just said up to a max. They initially had said $10,000. And then they were saying up to a maximum of $10,000. And now just recently they have become even more, this $1,000 per employee updated guidance that has just been coming out is brand new, and really limits the benefit under this program much more so than it did before. So, if you've got 3 or 4 employees, then you're going to max out, as far as we're understanding it now, the grant part of this loan, or the amount that would be eligible to be granted back against whatever loan you apply for, would max out at $1,000 per employee. So you would only have about a $3,000 or $4,000 grant available to you. And for those of our congregations who are actually looking at doing this, because the grant was not previously tied to employment, we had a lot of our congregations who, whether they're using supply clergy or, for whatever reasons, didn't, the PPP was not a benefit to them, were really looking towards this to get a $10,000 grant. Well, now that's probably, not going to be the case as far as we read this right now. So this is a major change, and not in a good way. However, it doesn't entirely negate what could be a potential benefit of getting an economic injury disaster loan. And so I'll go through the rest of why I say that. One other thing to be aware of is that unlike the PPP, this application process is directly with the SBA. You go onto the Small Business Administration website to complete the application. And then once they get the application, they're responsible for putting you in touch with a partner bank to further administer, that loan. We have been hearing that, while they say these low interest loans up to $2 million, this one, like the PPP, the whole application process has really been fraught with confusion, misunderstanding, and delays. We're hearing that because of monetary limitations on the EIDL, sources of funding. I think theirs I don't know, I think I'd seen a number like $10 billion somewhere along the way. That, because now there are so many people, especially when this grant was the $10,000, not limited, there was a flood of applications through the SBA's website, which helped to crash their system or make it, not work the way it should. And now we're hearing that, perhaps the maximum that any one entity can expect to get on a low interest loan like this may be somewhere between $15,000 and $25,000. And again, the only amount that's going to be granted against that would be the $1,000 per employee. And, that may very well be the reason why they put that particular limitation on it, was to sort of stop the bleeding, so to speak, because they've been getting so many applications. The thing about the grant that has always been a little bit kind of confusing is that to access the grant, you actually do have to apply for the loan. But the loan can be equivalent to the grant. When we were talking about $10,000, that was a pretty easy thing. But now that we're talking about $1,000 per employee, that has even been, changed to a certain extent. And as I mentioned, because of that criteria, it's not such a great, no longer such an attractive option for our small congregations without payroll. However, the loans are low interest, 2.75%, with a 1-year deferral on the start of repayment, and terms as long as 15 to 30 years. So again, if you are looking for a low interest, very beneficial, term loan to be able to help out with cash flow, and create some space to rebound from where we are now, it's worth considering. And again, the coordination with the PPP, you just can't use the proceeds of either an economic injury disaster loan or one of the emergency grants for the same purposes as the PPP loan. Furthermore, if you do receive a grant during the period of forgiveness, our 8-week forgiveness period, before you complete your forgiveness term on the PPP, if you apply for and receive a grant within that same time period, even though you use the grant for other things, that amount of that grant will reduce the forgiveness on your PPP loan. So you need to be aware of that. My feeling at this point in time is that perhaps, for those of us who are in the midst of the PPP process, that, I'm just going to wait until I get through the PPP, till I get my loan, till I make my forgiveness. And when I'm on the other side of that 8-week period, and more time has passed even then to get better guidance on what this is all about, then I'm going to relook at the economic injury disaster loans and grants and see if it still makes sense to try to do it. Because right now, for me, it's a lot of complication for very little benefit. And it is, there's not the same time limitation on these loans as there is on the PPP loan grant program. So that's where I am with that one. So I'm just going to check chat really quickly here. Emily was saying that the SBA website says that they're not currently accepting loan applications under the EIDL based on available appropriations. This does not surprise me a bit, and really just kind of, rests my case for saying, let's wait, by and large. For those who might have been thinking about applying for it, I know it's a disappointment, especially for some of the smaller congregations that were looking to take advantage of that $10,000 without having to worry about, the underlying payroll costs. But we'll just, there are other things that we can do working together to, help get through whatever that $10,000 grant might have been, whatever benefit that might have been. Let's see, Angie was asking, is there a full-time employment guideline on unemployment, or do part-time employees count? Part-time, unemployment is based on, state unemployment, I should say, is based on the award that you would get is based on what you earned. So yes, part-time employees count. They just don't have as much of a monetary benefit. Now, my understanding is that, the $600, the federal unemployment, the federal pandemic unemployment compensation portion of this also does apply to part-time employees. I have not quite honestly looked at the underlying guidance for that, even if such exists at this point, to see how they might prorate that, based on part-time rather than full-time employment. But my understanding is that part-time employees would still qualify. Okay, so Angie was saying not unemployment on the disaster grant. Yeah, I get it. I think I still answered your question appropriately. If not, let me know. I took it to mean that you were just asking about unemployment in general. And so that's what I was what I was responding to. And so I think we're pretty much through. Yeah, that takes care of our government assistance. The only other thing, again, I wanted to lift up for folks is the other types of help that we're getting from Church Pension Group, the deferrals and the waivers. Church Pension Group has already let us know that they will, without any application process needed, we can defer payments on pension assessments and health insurance premiums for up to 90 days. And so again, here what we're talking about is a timing thing. You would not want to defer your health insurance payments, premium payments, or your pension assessments during the 8-week period that you're trying to maximize your loan forgiveness with the PPP. However, once you get through that 8-week period, and hopefully you've been able to get your entire amount of your loan forgiven, which might actually even mean prepaying some of your pension assessment or health insurance premium payments. Once you get to that point and you've achieved the forgiveness of your PPP loan, then, if we're still at a point where we're looking at cash flow issues, which we might even be more in that place then than we are now, you should be aware that you can, at that point in time, begin to defer your pension assessment payments and your health insurance premium payments. So coordinate it. Be aware of the timing. And then finally, they have let us also know that this is for pension assessments only, and only in really extenuating circumstances that CPG would be open to granting an actual waiver of pension payments. And so this should only be used as sort of the last resort after your PPP process or, is considered. And then after the 90-day deferral period is exhausted, and then if you're still in a place where you're really, really struggling, there is an application form that can be submitted. It actually goes through our diocesan finance office because it does require some certifications from us as well as the bishop's signature that you could literally get waivers for 2 months worth of your pension assessments. So what that basically means from a timing standpoint is if you've gone through the 90-day deferral period, which basically means you've now not paid 3 months worth of pension assessments, and you're in a point where you know that you need this waiver, then you can apply for it, and 2 months out of the 3 months that you already haven't paid would then be forgiven. And then you would just have to pay the one, have to look at paying the 1 month and then, moving forward. And again, if you're in a position there where, you're still having difficulties, we should be in touch. Please be in touch with the finance office, because we, are also working on other ways to be able to support all of our congregations if we do end up with some, real cash flow constraints. In light of all that, just again, going back to everybody needs to be doing short-term cash flow projections. When you do that, the considerations you should be looking at, consistently being monitoring your pledge and plate contributions by mail and also by e-giving, to see, be doing sort of what if scenarios, so that based on the levels that you're seeing now, be thinking about, well, over the next 3 to 4 months, what if that reduces by 25%? What if it reduces by 50%? Just be thinking about it so that you can have sort of a contingency plan in place of what you want to do if you see that beginning to happen. Factor in there also that, whatever PPP loan you actually get, or, payroll retention credit impact in reducing your payroll tax expenses, unemployment impact if you are not able to, maintain unemployment, and then, the impact that any of the CPG deferrals or waiver might have. Just all of these what if scenarios, and, again, minimizing any of the costs that you're actually, paying, any of your expenses during this 3 to 4 month time period. Develop for yourself, if you can, a template so that you can be doing a bunch of different what if scenarios and be looking at that as a vestry, so you're not all of a sudden in a position where it just happens to you, and you're not prepared, or haven't been looking forward towards that. Last but not least, and this, slide presentation is already and will continue to be up on the website. There are some helpful links here. The Treasury Department's PPP website, the maximum loan amount template that we've been using for those of you who may still be in the process of applying for PPP, updated authoritative guidance on all of these aspects of the CARES Act. There's a nonprofitcpa.com website that has been great. It's been one of my go-to places to keep up on things. I basically have just posted as they've been updating their outline of all of these things that we've just talked about. Very bullet pointed, very clear language. So that's also up on our website. The Small Business Administration faith-based FAQs, and then a sample PPP calculation with a comparison against the payroll retention credit. And then I am done, unless Bishop or Steve, there's anything else I've got to address.
No, I haven't seen anything else, Phyllis.
I don't think anything came up on the chat.
Good, because I feel like I've taken up way too much time already. I'm
Okay.
sorry about that.
Thank you. Thanks. So it's a lot of helpful information, and it's a lot. I mean, a lot's happening. It's happening fast. And I know we're all grateful for your willingness to stay on top of it. So, okay. Let's back to here. Is that the right one? No, wrong one. Sorry.
And I am willing to, with that serving the wider community, sort of stand in for Keith if he wasn't able to join.
Yeah, if you've got some information, that'd be great. He's going to join us next week. He had to take a call with the governor's office. So.
Sure. Yeah. And I mean, all I would say briefly is that, again, on the community resources portion of our COVID-19 resource area, Keith has been absolutely fantastic about updating us by email with a number of different community-oriented resources that are available. Different webinars that people can sit in on based on different areas of response. We do our best to update that portion of our website as Keith updates us with information we think that could be relevant for you. So please do go ahead and check that out frequently just to see if there's anything else. The NJ VOAD updates that he posts, are also updated there. The one thing I really did want to emphasize to everybody and ask if you could recommend to, the appropriate person in your congregation has to do with the outreach ministries focus group meeting that happens every Friday. And I'm spacing on the time, Steve. Is it 4 o'clock on Fridays? I think we're doing that.
That's right, Phyllis, at 4 o'clock on Fridays.
Yeah, thanks. So Those outreach ministries calls, which Clara Gregory from our Jubilee Ministries has graciously agreed to be convener for, are really, really important. We really want to get as many folks as possible from our different congregations to be able to get on those calls and share with us resources, experiences, what's going on, where our needs, as well as, Clara has an amazing number of resources and connections with, other community partners. And she's really made a habit of, she has reached out and sort of put together a roster of these different community partners who are going to be on the call, on the Zoom meetings to tell us about resources and get feedback from us, on what our needs are. Tomorrow's at 4:00, she's going to have the executive director of the New Jersey Anti-Poverty Network. And they've got connections just all over the place. If you look in that community resources area, one of the biggest documents there is a complete listing of links from the Anti-Poverty Network that keeps us continuously updated with what all of these community partners are doing. It's amazing. So tomorrow at 4:00 on our Zoom meeting, she's going to have the executive director from the Anti-Poverty Network as a resource to give a presentation, but also to field questions or ask us about what our needs are. And then she also has the, I believe it's the Director of Human Services for the Salvation Army. Again, another huge community partner. So those two people are going to be there on tomorrow's session, and then each subsequent Friday, she's having other people from other community partners come in to talk. But we really do need to hear from, as many people as possible from our own outreach ministries about what's going on, things that people are experiencing. So if you would be so kind as to, try, I know it is one other thing, and these people are incredibly busy, but even if there's somebody who could represent you, who at least knows something about the ministry that's going on, even if it's not the person most directly involved, it would be really helpful for us to have you there.